2020. It's impossible to begin this video without a reflection on the past 366 days. Many I know have been directly affected by the global pandemic, as I imagine you watching have been. At a time when all of us need to be together, for our health, we continue to isolate. This is what I've been doing since March. In fact, the last time I made a video like this was back in April. Since then, well, I've been busy. But all of us have been. Working from home has become the new normal, as has work beyond work. This past year, I've made a steady business helping content creators with their channel branding. While maybe you haven't seen my videos, you have definitely seen my work across a number of excellent channels on this platform and others. But I took the time to also try a couple of other things. I got back into illustration, which I think is slowly improving. I even did the first season of the podcast, one which I hope to pick back up in the new year with some new guests. But I've also played a lot of video games. Old ones, new ones, some I've loved, some not so much. I've played a lot more cooperative games this year than I ever have too, likely because of the current situation. I had never played Resident Evil 5 as it was intended until me and a friend went through it following playthroughs of RE4. I've even got to enjoy the Trine series as it was intended with two others. All of them are great games. Neither of which I'm talking about in this video. Neither am I talking about Dead Rising, although I did consider making a video about it earlier in the year. In short, I didn't really have a lot of meat to the video, outside of talking about its mastery of time travel and its wide arrangement of melee options. I do think it's pretty great though, and worth checking out if you haven't before. I also played Danganronpa 2. So, what am I talking about? Well, a few games that, for whatever reason, I vied with a lot this year. Maybe their gameplay, their aesthetics, maybe they felt of the time, or maybe they're just timeless. Whatever the reason, I'm going to make a case for why they're worth my recommendation. I formatted my reasoning and even included playtime so you know I'm not picking what's popular. Which is why Cyberpunk, Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, Genshin Impact, Doom Eternal, The Last of Us Part 2, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Ghost of Tsushima, The Avengers, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and other games you'd likely expect aren't here, because I don't have a computer powerful enough to play them, or I just didn't particularly gel with them. In 2017, I did this as a podcast discussion with my friends. In 2018, I made a Twitter thread that I still think is pretty cool. In 2019, I hijacked an episode of Game Overtime to talk about my Game of the Years. So now, I guess we're back to doing videos again. Which is good, because it means I can show gameplay footage. So I guess with this introduction out of the way, let's get into some of our winners. This is the 2020 Games of the Year. Starting with...
I'm back. Again.
A genre tag can often be a warning label. Not everyone can listen to heavy metal or can stomach horror movies. And here's how I feel about the genre of roguelikes. Intensified role-playing games where death is inevitable and progression is randomised. Mastering a roguelike is an act of throwing yourself against a wall until you get a feel for which bricks hurt the least. It's quite the buy-in, especially when there's so many adventures out there that do a lot to make you feel at home the moment you press play. Which is maybe why I ended up falling for Hades. Granted, its definition as a pure-blooded roguelike is contestable, though death and randomisation are very much part of its makeup. But Hades gives personality to its mountain climb of mastery. Hades is an action roguelike from the developers of Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre. Set in Greek mythology, you play as the prince of the underworld, Zagreus, as he attempts to escape to the surface and, hopefully, the Pantheon above. However, your attempts are at odds with a Greek chorus of nasties and hellish lieutenants looking to stop you. Fortunately for you, help is at hand from your uncles and cousins on Mount Olympus, as well as other figures of mythology who provide words of wisdom or boons to improve your loadout.
So don't you take it personal and stick with me.
Hacking and slashing is your means to cut ahead. There is a wide assortment of weapons to choose from, all with their own modifications to apply. Hades has a wonderful game feel that, across all these interlocking systems, feels great to engage with. Enemy hits feel appropriately meaty, and getting out of the way is zippy without ever being squirrely. Of course, Supergiant games do more than just their moment-to-moment gameplay. When you return back home to the underworld, which, as the nature of roguelikes dictates, will happen often, you have a little time to get to know the people you work alongside. Your father, Hades, your mother figure, Nyx, Greek heroes like Achilles, hired help like Dusa. The waiting room turns the afterlife into a workplace. Some of your vanquished foes even appear here between rounds, talking frankly with you and other members of the underworld. There's even a star employee board that updates each time you return home. Meanwhile, the Greek gods are all given distinct personality through sound cues and voice acting, like the Soldier Ares, intelligent Artemis, and bubbly lush Dionysus. It helps that each of these characters is given life through a dynamic dialogue system. Their voice lines will change depending on the decisions that came beforehand, such as what gods you've met, upgrades you've taken, and bosses that defeated you. It gives personality to a genre that, often, due to its random nature, doesn't have it. Where an average roguelike will focus its attention on world generation, Hades instead does world building. Every room has a purpose that is often extrapolated through flavor text. The left shoulder bumper is dedicated to bringing up a codex full of information. It means that, even when your progression through the underworld is reset to 0 when you die, progression is still made through the story, as characters develop and new storylines show up. That's alongside mechanical permanent upgrades to Zagreus you can purchase through a magic mirror, and permanent changes you can make to the underworld waiting room. The A button causes Zagreus to dash forward in a big burst. Pressing X at the same time causes the two to combine into a quick dash attack. Sometimes this dash can be modified with boons that you take from Mount Olympus. One might allow you to ricochet enemy projectiles back at them, or leave big plumes of alcohol that causes enemies to take damage over time. Even the base dash itself can be modified, such as increasing how many times you can dash before a cooldown, or how far you move ahead. Hades is generous in how sweeping its boons modify your simple commands, applying things like area of effects or critical hits. This is included on top of gifts like extra health, weapon modifications, chamber modifiers, and more. Roguelikes are by their very design meant to be hostile, and you'd think Hades being set in the underworld would be the ultimate example of such. But from all the tools it gives you, upgrades you can eat, and how nice everyone is to Zagreus, it actually feels pretty nice to be there. Usually I will try and spend an hour with a game to get over the initial hurdles it throws at me. If things are too easy, it feels like I've gotten everything out of it I'd want to. Too difficult and I'll bounce right off it. Let's use an example of another high-profile roguelike that was released this year. Spelunky 2. I love watching other people play Spelunky 2, but I very quickly fell out of love with actually playing it. Simply, things are obtuse, and the level of difficulty is initially a lot higher than Hades. The curve starts high and then gets even higher. Worse so, it takes a while to get to the good stuff. New weapons, new tools, new meat to bite into. At least watching an LP, I can skip ahead to get to the good stuff. Unfortunately, I bounced off what is likely an excellent experience before I got to fully appreciate it. Hades doesn't have that issue though. You unlock great boons right from the get-go, and there's so many of them that you never have to get bored with it. However, I am someone who, once they find a particular playstyle they like, sticks with it. Like these big old fists, or that one upgrade for the railgun that removes reloading, or festive fog on my projectiles and reflection on my dash. While Hades isn't so kind that it would give me all those things when I want them, playing it is so quick that it's not long until they show up. That said, I have never touched that bow and arrow. Hades gets my recommendation to you at home because I'm assuming that, maybe like me, you don't entirely love roguelikes. You may have played Bastion or know of Supergiant's work. I would say that so far this is the best title that they have produced. I like their fantasy take on basketball when they made Pyre, but this is a far more accessible and crowd-pleasing product. Everything that they do well, art direction, voice direction, and great game feel, are at their best here. There is a simplicity to it that harkens to an ideal Super Nintendo game that never existed, but with a modern sensibility to its writing and aesthetics that makes it stand out even amongst cutting-edge realism. Importantly, it's a great game for most time frames. You can put a lot of time into Hades if you want, or play maybe a round or two between other things. It's a perfect fit for, say, a Nintendo Switch, which can be a dedicated home experience or a breezy portable time filler. Hades likely could have been my game of 2019, but it is definitely a game that 2020 needed. The monotony of running through an endless hell, being remedied by a cast of friends that are there to support you, is scarily prescient of the present.
That'll teach him.
Shit forgot.
XCOM Chimera Squad is a standalone game set in the universe of XCOM. A sequel to the events of XCOM War of the Chosen, it is set in a future of tenuous peace between humanity and the alien invaders. We focus on the titular Chimera Squad, an elite squad of humans and aliens working together to stop terrorist cells in City 31, a model for peaceful coexistence. If you haven't played an XCOM game before, simply they're strategy games where you command soldiers on a board turn by turn. You place them in cover, shoot the bad guys, heal and support as needed. In between rounds, you're back at a home base developing new tools, surveying potential threats, and managing the well-being of your squad and the world these battles take place in. Chimera Squad differs from previous XCOM games by changing the stakes. You are no longer Earth's military force attempting to stop alien occupation, but rather your peacekeepers maintaining order in a state-of-the-art metropolis. It would be simple to describe Chimera Squad as XCOM but smaller, but it'd be more appropriate to describe it as XCOM but concentrated. You're still expected to coordinate and command as you did before, but things are intensified. Your battlefields are close quarter spaces, roadsides, apartments, factories. Your threats are just as deadly as before, but perhaps more so because of how close they are. To emulate the chaos of these situations, the standard turn order of an XCOM game has been changed. Simply in XCOM 2 you would place all your soldiers, play their actions, and cue responses in your turn before the enemy did in theirs. Now the turn order is mixed up. A single enemy's turn might play out in between two of your squad members, for example. It breaks up the planning into smaller challenges to be considered. For example, you could very well remove an enemy from the turn order for a well-placed attack on your first soldier's turn, allowing you to immediately play the second soldier straight after. But perhaps you have to consider what a serious threat 4 turns ahead is going to do. Fortunately, the developer knew all the fun this mixed up turn order could achieve. Things like grenades no longer activate the moment they're thrown. Instead, they could explode in the middle of a turn order. So now you have to consider placement. It could open the opportunity to throw an enemy right on top of it, though you may need to sacrifice placement to do so. Then, benefiting of its team play, you can sacrifice one squad member's turn to give another member further down the line a chance to go first. Great if you need to set up a particular ambush or get an ability in play, but it's limited to 1 charge per squad member, meaning that you always need to consider the best opportunity to pop it. The A button is your confirmation button, where your squad member is going to move, what action they'll perform, what item you'll buy when you're back at base, so forth. Chimera Squad gives you a lot more things for that A button to do, however. Unlike the soldiers of the previous XCOM games, the Chimera Squad can't be customised, renamed, or given new backstories. The benefit is they're far more detailed characters than the limitation of even War of the Chosen Soldier creator could achieve. All of them are fully voice acted, and portrayed both in 3D models and drawn illustration during cutscenes and chatter. Their distinct personalities go in hand with their entirely unique loadouts likewise. From their heavy-hitting Axiom to the shield-bearing Cherub, they have versatility that even endgame XCOM captains didn't. But they're not Jack and Jill of all trades either. They complement each other's skill sets just as beforehand. For example, you might use Cherub's shield ability to cloak Axiom, so they can get up close with enemies, draw their aggro, and feed them hard melee damage. Chimera Squad is generous in a way XCOM usually isn't. Although squads are mostly randomised if you don't choose to play with a tutorial, almost all of their abilities are useful. Like a drone that, on every turn, will always allow one squad member to recover 4 hit points, free of charge. Or another drone that is incredibly effective against android enemies, which one of the initial play paths is full of. Compared to previous XCOM games, it's also a lot faster to get to the good stuff. For example, let me show you my total playtime for XCOM 2. This accumulates a number of playthroughs since its release in 2016. Of course, Chimera Squad is nowhere near that yet, but I would argue that much more has happened in that concentrated time than in XCOM 2. Whereas before I had to consider the long war, the right developments to make and long-term goals to achieve, this is instead the lightning round, more about quick decision making and heat-of-the-moment actions. Action is a good way to describe this game. Is best exemplified in its glorious slow-motion breaches. Essentially, right at the beginning of a round, you place your squad members around a breach point. This decides initial turn order and also lets you apply a special effect. Then, once active, the charges blow and the Chimera Squad floods in. As enemies are stunned, you go into slow motion to pull off headshots, cover dives and more. Like the rest of XCOM, there's decision making to be considered here, as a successful breach can make all the difference at the beginning of a round. As a fan of coordinated action movies, I still haven't grown bored of doing these right at the beginning of every round. It's one of the things I hope they bring back to whatever the next XCOM game is. My go-to game in the XCOM series to recommend to people was XCOM 2. Despite its somewhat gauche premise and even more awkward presentation, it's a series and a format I think everyone should try. The turn-based nature, simple interface and wealth of options means it's easy enough to get into, but with enough depth and mastery that you'll want to come back. However, I think Chimera Squad is now going to be my go-to recommendation. For one thing, it's far quicker to get into than XCOM 2. Development, research and surveillance are much more streamlined than they were back in previous games, meaning there's very little downtime between one action-packed round and the next. And like I said, far more is happening in these cramped and chaotic spaces than before. It changed the challenge, rather than nerfing or buffing it. Granted, it's difficult to say just how much of my enjoyment for Chimera Squad came out of the fact that I was already pretty well versed in the language of previous XCOM games. I mean, I know what the A button does, and I also know the awkwardness of the camera angles and the rules of cover. But its tutorial is robust enough that even if this was your first exposure to a game like this, you should be able to pick it up as quickly as the actions pop off. Importantly, there's something here to grip with that XCOM 2 doesn't have for a while. Appealing player characters with their quirks to dig into, and a big conspiracy to unravel. You could almost describe it as XCOM is a hero title, and while these characters aren't quite the Avengers, it might be better to describe them as the X-Men. They're very odd, and you're not going to like all of them, but when they bounce their powers off one another, amazing things can happen. It's tricky to talk about a game where you play as a police force tackling unrest in a built-up city in 2020 of all years. But I'd like to think that the name Chimera Squad is indicative of its overall positive theme. The Latin motto for the team is Diversis Viribus, which roughly translates to strength through diversity. All the members of their team, including the humans, are allowed to show off their heritage through and through. Importantly, working together allows them to overcome obstacles that single-mindedness can't achieve. all of their enemies, whilst diverse in their backgrounds, believe that they can achieve supremacy through homogeneity. Whilst XCOM has always had an issue with its military aesthetic, Chimera Squad presents a positive vision of a future that moves away from military intervention and is more about community-driven effort. "2020 has been an opportunity for many to pick up a new habit, learn a skill they always wanted, achieve something they've been putting off, turn a negative into a positive. But these uncertain times have also led many of us to want the comfort of something familiar. Watch an old movie, blow the dust off a forgotten book, or dive into an old hobby. I think it's telling that some of the PS5's biggest launch games are familiar. Spider-Man Miles Morales is an expanded version of the Insomniac Spider-Man game for the PS4, diving into the story of a character that the world at large was introduced to in Into the Spider-Verse. Meanwhile, Demon's Souls is a lavish remake of the PS3 game that started the Souls phenomenon. And while some of my favourite games from this year were also very familiar experiences, though not entirely so. Like these PS5 releases, they have been made new again, either through more sophisticated visuals, overhauled gameplay, or most importantly, improved user experience. Resident Evil 3 is the sequel to Resident Evil 2. Picking up in the same time frame, we focus on Jill Valentine, one of the surviving STARS members from the original Resident Evil, as she attempts to escape a zombie-ridden Raccoon City and the unstoppable Nemesis. Command & Conquer Remastered is a remake of both Tiberian Dawn and Red Alert by the original developers behind those titles, with even its full motion video cutscenes upscaled 4K with a remade presentation and modernised user experience. Meanwhile, as the name suggests, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2 combines the first Tony Hawk and its sequel together into a high-definition package. From the developers behind the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, these games are reimagined with high-definition visuals whilst retaining the excellent game feel that made them smash hits during the PlayStation era. Like the brilliant 2019 remake of Resident Evil 2, Nemesis is the PlayStation adventure game reimagined as a third-person shooter. However, don't expect the entire game to have shooting as mindless as your target. Exploration and puzzle solving is your means to move forward. In between shooting galleries and action set pieces, you may need to find a way to get a train system back online, or find refuge in a hospital. These aren't as simple as pulling a lever. Rather, it's a dance of item management and simple puzzle solving. There's a fine balancing act between the action movie rules of Resident Evil 4 and the survival horror of Resident Evil 7, flip-flopping between the two modes to maintain excellent pacing, and to always keep you interested in what's next. Not only has it found a way to improve on the PlayStation games, but it found a way to improve on the Resident Evils that had come since. Meanwhile, Command & Conquer is the real-time strategy game. That means building bases, building lots of units, and attacking the enemy through mouse-driven commands. Every mission may introduce a new wrinkle to the war, such as rough terrain, unique unit types, or enemy structures that change the flow of battle. And half the fun is figuring out the intended solution whilst the clock continues to tick forward. This remaster does little to complicate the moment-to-moment gameplay of the original, and for a novice to the genre, that was greatly appreciated. Much like how Mario Kart or the original Doom shine because of their simple control schemes. Command & Conquer does likewise. You drag to select, you collect a command. Making separate squads of soldiers is as simple as selecting the ones you want and dragging them away. Of course, there are hotkeys and actions to simplify this action even further. Finally, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is a skateboarding game. You pull off tricks, skate the environment you're in, stick it to the man. These fully 3D environments are a paradise of rails to grind and half-pipes to ramp out of. Importantly, they're all set up in such a way that natural lines are formed. You'll trick out of a dish, into a manual, onto a grind rail, so forth. This isn't just fun for the sake of it, however. Tony Hawk is about hitting high scores, driven by hitting these perfect lines with a string of unique tricks, inflating your numbers by maintaining the combo, and diversifying your tricks for as long as possible. But that's not quite all either. because Tony Hawk levels are also about hitting particular objectives, such as scouting out the skate letters, finding the hidden videotape, or hitting particular gaps and tricks. They get you to think about these levels as tools to achieve your goals, building up enough speed by using these ramps to get that particular gap, or finding that special spot you know you can build up a big enough combo. The skate letters and videotapes, meanwhile, encourage exploration. What grinds haven't you hit yet, and how do you exactly reach that ramp? In the original Resident Evil 3, pressing the A, or I guess X button was your confirmation button and attack button. However, more fitting of a third-person control scheme, attack has been moved to the right trigger for the remake. This makes sense, as this button to shoot has been the case pretty much since Halo made the trigger of your controller match the trigger pull of a gun. So in the remake, A is just your confirmation and interaction button. It's nice because it remembers its roots. These aren't environments to be run through like your average shooter. Sometimes you need to slow down to pick something up, read a book, look at the environment. Fitting of its slower pace. Command & Conquer is a PC game. That means pressing A on the keyboard moves the camera to the left. The mouse buttons are where you'll be doing most of your interactions. Left and right will be used for selecting soldiers, moving them in waves, getting them to attack the enemy. It turns controlling hundreds of single soldiers into a simple command, fitting with its brand name. Meanwhile, A is how you ollie in Tony Hawk. It's funny to come back to this after a decade of EA experimenting with the formula of a skateboarding game with its Skate series. It deconstructed what it meant to be a game about skateboarding, and put the technique of pulling up what are difficult feats in the real world into focus. In order to ollie, you use the control sticks to try and emulate the kick of your back foot hitting the board to provide lift. Coming back to Tony Hawk these years later, you immediately understand the intent of what they were going for when they mapped the entire kick, pull and lift of an ollie to a single A press. Feeling like Tony Hawk isn't meant to be a complete emulation of the man, putting you into the mindscape of someone who, as Twitter seems to paint, lives in an existential nightmare. It's about how effortless skateboarding is to Tony Hawk and his contemporaries. Tony Hawk for many people my age is what got them into skateboarding, and by and large skate culture. Tony Hawk Pro Skater makes skateboarding cool. Like how a superhero game will do what it can to make the player's actions look awesome and make them feel like the character they're inhabiting. Tony Hawk does the same thing. It simplifies the commands so the mastery can come from mastering a level's layout. Resident Evil 3 is okay. There's a reason this is getting a joint award with 2 other titles, and that's because almost everything it does well is because the Resident Evil 2 remake did it nearly a year before. That's not to say that there aren't places this shines, however. It's a lot more action oriented than its predecessor, where Resident Evil 2 starts as a puzzling survival horror story and ramps up into an action movie. Resident Evil 3 more confidently begins in this zone, and then manages to escalate from there. This goes too for the titular nemesis. He's not quite as menacing as Mr. X was in RE2, but he's not really meant to be. The former was an obstacle to work around, while Nemesis is an overwhelming force that affects your progression in a bigger way. While I'm definitely more of a fan of the slower, survival and puzzle-driven nature of, say, Resident Evil 7, I had a hell of a good time with Resident Evil 3. Like an action movie, it's a more slight experience than its asking price, but it'd be a perfect double feature with Resident Evil 2. Meanwhile, Command & Conquer Remastered was the best introduction I could have gotten to a genre that I have always been interested to try, but was always put off by the high-level gameplay of. StarCraft and Company of Heroes this isn't, but it's given me the education I need to move on to those games. But more than that, I never actually realised what Command & Conquer was. The name had always conjured the image of it being a gruff, hoorah, military ass-kissing simulator that Call of Duty games have since become. What I didn't realise was that they were always in on the joke. It's Starship Troopers, down to the supposed good guys doing unspeakable things in the name of winning for quote-unquote good. With its utterly bombastic UI design and soundtrack, it's having fun with its already ridiculous premise. Perhaps it's that the dated FMV sequences add to the camp factor, But it's a shock to have now found out that Command & Conquer was always a tongue-in-cheek masterpiece. As for Tony Hawk, well, it's just nice to have a Tony Hawk game again. Like every series, Pro Skater grew into a beast of different ideas. It tried to grow its little open world with Grand Theft Auto influences, like getting off the skateboard and into other vehicles. It became more about aesthetics, and went all in on its tenuous jackass links. The last time they attempted to do a back-to-basics remake of 1 and 2, we got Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD. Whether it was the result of a rushed development time or going in with the absolute wrong intentions, HD didn't hit the mark. In fact, even compared to the weirdest of the Tony Hawk games, it was absolutely awful. A trend that continued when the same developers tried another numbered sequel with the same broken tools. Perhaps it took the success of the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy for Activision to figure out the secret sauce that makes it remaster sing. After all, it's using the same developers to achieve that. And while I was initially skeptical, the warehouse demo turned me around. Not because it was the Tony Hawk I remember, but it was better. I could change the control scheme to something I preferred, I could replace the soundtrack with my own music. I could turn on cheats to improve my experience. They didn't even try and remake the old UI. They came up with this awesome collage of street art that I'd love to think they spent a chunk of the budget on hiring artists to create. And well, after the Insane trilogy, we got a brand new Crash Bandicoot game. One that I would absolutely love to play, but can't because it's not on the PC. But from what I've watched, it looks absolutely fantastic, and seems to absolutely get what made the original 3 games work. Which, hey, I tried to lay that out in a video all these years back. So I can only hope they figure out the same thing with Tony Hawk. Keep that excellent game feel, but give us new environments to master and objectives to fulfill. I guess you'd say, if these are all remakes, why not go back and play the originals? They're likely cheaper, and likely would have lesser demands on your computer system. Well, that's the thing. In the case of Resident Evil 3, you could emulate it, but you're emulating it as it was, with stodgy tank controls and chunky resolution. Tony Hawk is available on everything, but this remaster feels far better than the originals ever did. And Command & Conquer, well, that's a game that needs to run in DOSBox to play, and well, old PC games aren't the most user-friendly experiences. So remasters like this, for me, are the best way to experience something that you at home may have always wanted to try but didn't know where to start. Resident Evil 3 gets a partial recommendation. If it's on sale or bundled with RE2, then you should absolutely grab it. If you've always been interested in trying an RTS but were put off by the high level of entry, then grab Command & Conquer Remastered. It's the nearest thing you'll get to the Mario Kart RTS games. Easily approachable, but with plenty of depth to dig into. Meanwhile, Tony Hawk should absolutely be in your game collection, even if you don't like skateboarding. It's very much its own beast, a 3D platforming character action game that nothing really feels like. It might get you to appreciate the sport a little, or at least the aesthetics and music of. However, apologies to whoever was in charge of the soundtrack for Tony Hawk, as I turned it off quite quickly to put on Spotify instead, because again, that is how I play Tony Hawk games. Approaching a remaster in 2020 is much like approaching an old piece of art. You're being asked to restore something not just to how it may have looked, but what people remember it looking like. It opens the opportunity to make something even better than the original, as is the case with Resident Evil 3, or something that retains the spirit of the original, like Command & Conquer. As we move into a new year and a new console cycle, developers will be asking this more often as new technology opens new opportunities. Those haptic triggers on the PS5 might make FPS games feel new again. The Switch's transformable design might let a game with strange pacing finally make sense at home and away. Even Game Pass might be the perfect platform for games that are in a constant development and change. Sometimes we want to feel comfortable, but we also want a little challenge. An old hobby from a new angle, an old book with new knowledge, turn old negatives into new positives. And I feel remasters understand that. making old feel new again.
It's me, Mario! Hello! Let's go!
A game that needs no introduction. Super Mario 64 was a launch game for Nintendo's first console built for 3D graphics, the Nintendo 64. Taking seasoned platforming veteran Super Mario into the third dimension, Super Mario 64 is a groundbreaking 3D platforming game that challenges the convention of the games that came beforehand. Whilst the story remains the same, Mario is tasked with saving Princess Peach from King Bowser. The situation has changed. Instead of an adventure built of linear obstacle courses to complete in a sequential order, instead Princess Peach's castle is a hub to many 3D worlds with multiple objectives to complete. For a completed objective, Mario gains a star. These stars are currency used to unlock new rooms in the castle, which will lead either to new 3D worlds or confrontations with Bowser. Super Mario 64 has been re-released on the Wii, and Nintendo Switch as part of the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection. It has also been remade as Super Mario 64 DS for the Nintendo DS, which was later ported to the Wii U. As you're likely to expect, it is also available to emulate on your PC, which is where I grabbed all this footage, and where I mostly replay it. Think of a traditional Super Mario level. You start at the far left, and somewhere on the far right is a flagpole or a gate. Stage right. Simply, you must get from A to B. Stopping you along the way are obstacles, enemies, and obtuse level design. You tackle these through runs, jumps, and power-ups. It's the quintessential platforming game, which all platforming games since owe some credit to. Now imagine this. There's a flagpole, but it's right on top of a mountain. To get to this mountain, you move forward, left, right, you get the idea. But along the way to this mountain are 100 coins, 8 of which are bright red. There's also these yellow stars hidden in a box, and behind a gate guarded by a big chain chomp. And supposedly there's a way to get another flying through rings. Sometimes you get to the mountaintop, and there's a guy wearing a crown who calls himself King Bob up there, and he challenges you to sumo. And sometimes you get there, but you are in a race with Koopa the Quick. I've just described the first level of Super Mario 64. It's called Bob-omb's Battlefield. Simply, Super Mario 64 isn't about A to B. It's about A to B, C, D, E, F, G. There's no time limit restricting your play. There's not even a power-up system that blocks your progress. Instead, Super Mario 64 politely says, "Let's go," and the rest is left in your capable hands. Progression is gated by stars, but outside of a few exceptions, what stars they are is not important. You can get 3 from one level, 1 from another, and a final 4 elsewhere to fight Bowser on the ground floor. You could get them all from the same one if you wanted. Super Mario 64 gives you almost complete freedom to how you want to approach these situations, which is likely why it became such a groundbreaking success on release. Like every Super Mario game, the A button does one very important thing: jump. It would not be a platforming game if there was no way to get up onto a platform, which is what jumping is for. In the days of Donkey Kong, Super Mario's name was Jumpman, so it was important in his first 3D outing he would be able to jump, man. But the Super Mario 64 isn't satisfied with just one jump. You see, this Mario is far more animated than the last one. You can jump, but you can also long jump, and somersault, and side flip, and wall kick. You can chain your jump into a dive, or a high kick, or a ground pound. It's turning the humble jump into a versatile tool to accomplish these objectives. It turns Super Mario into a simple yet effective means to solve problems, more sophisticated than the ones that made up the obstacle courses of the previous 2D Mario games. I was around 6 years old when my parents bought an N64 for Christmas. This black plastic computer that looked like an old temple ground you place stone pillars atop of. A PlayStation spun a disc that sat hidden in a plastic clamshell. But you could always see what was in an N64. And for me, it was that picture of Mario running over a hill from a fire-breathing Bowser. A scenario like that never happens in Super Mario 64. You never find Bowser in a field or get chased by him. But at the time, I wouldn't have been shocked if that was the case. You see, Super Mario 64 is an object of curiosity. Like said, there is no big map where you see all the levels in front of you that Mario will visit. Instead, all these worlds are hidden in the hub of Peach's castle. You learn early on that jumping into a painting will take you to another world. But not all paintings do that. Then you find out that it doesn't just have to be paintings. On my first playthrough, I never learnt about the world hiding behind an inconspicuous wall, or which paintings on the top floor took me where. I remember jumping headfirst into a pool of oil, and found it took me to an entire underground level. In that level, there was another pool of oil, that took me to a new area, that unlocked a hat that turned me into metal, allowing me to walk under the water. Super Mario 64 is full of magic like this. Worlds can be gags hidden in mirrors, or an entire world could be built around a fun optical illusion, or one could be hidden in a grandfather clock, where the speed of the level is locked to whatever the hands of the grandfather clock fell on. Platforming games have experimented with secret entrances and having the worlds be affected by conditions on the map screen, but none have really managed to nail this feeling of curiosity. While I didn't believe that this was a little world on my television, I genuinely believe that there could have been extra worlds hidden in places I hadn't yet investigated. Super Mario 64 is a very special game to me because of this. Collecting 100 gold coins or jumping on a giant wiggler are fine, but it's seeking out these places that were exciting. It's the video game take on Pass the Parcel, where you peel off a new layer of wrapping paper and discover something new underneath. It's why Princess Peach's castle to me is as much of a place as, say, Lordran or Liberty City. There's no lore to dig into or verisimilitude to unpack, but it is a space that can and should be explored, and your reward for doing so is something you haven't seen before. Even with very little, the way these secrets are presented do something special that most games don't. They make you believe that there is far more out there. The thing is, I'm not 6 years old anymore. Like a family holiday destination, Super Mario 64 is a place I have visited often over the years. There's very little of that mystery left to me, and well, it's more somewhat lived in. I know the shortcuts, I know the locales, and I certainly have memorised all the solutions to its puzzles and obstacles. Warm memories that I have of the place are starting to be replaced with fresh playthroughs. And the thing is, the curiosity of whether there is something new here has been replaced with a different kind of curiosity. Because like I said, Mario is a very versatile kit to complete objectives. An immersive sim this isn't, but there is never one prescribed solution to solving a Super Mario 64 objective. Let's take for example a game like Banjo-Kazooie. At the time, it outdid Super Mario 64 with its incredible production values. It looks nicer, sounds nicer, and in some ways is nice to play. Even its objectives are a little more sophisticated than Super Mario 64's. But Banjo-Kazooie is a little like going back to Disneyland. The rides don't change. In fact, in some cases, you're a bit too large to fully appreciate them now. The best you can do is take someone who's never experienced it before there so they can be wowed by it. You're there purely because it's comforting. Something that reminds you of when you were young and the world didn't seem so bleak. But Super Mario 64 isn't that. Maybe it's because it was the first game to try this, there's a lot of holes in its design, but they are holes that you can exploit. The best example I always think is this one objective where you have to shoot yourself out of a cannon to grab a star. But you don't have to do that. If you've mastered jumps, you can side flip into a wall kick and grab it like that. The same goes for coins floating on an island you can do a long jump to. It's using a relatively simple toolkit to achieve so many different things. I'm not a speedrunner, but I'd like to think I've gotten pretty good at playing Super Mario 64. I'd like to think I've gotten quicker at it too. I've returned to this game a lot because of my fondness for it, but I've stuck with it because I want to do things better than I used to. For one thing, whenever I play now, I use a little game shark code that turns off being kicked out of a level when you get a star. It almost turns it a little bit into Super Mario Odyssey. It makes things smoother, and means I can focus on maximising play. I can chain getting 100 coins into red coins, into collecting a star, into doing this and that. And because I'm trying to do it against the clock, it's turned Super Mario 64 into Tony Hawk. Sometimes old games don't have to feel old. It's the mindset you come at them with. In the case of Super Mario 64, there's plenty to its design that leaves room for high level improvement. Look at the channels out there that have dedicated themselves to getting to the bottom of all its coding quirks, or the ones that continue to mod and tweak at the game years after release. There was an entire effort to finally port the code to open source, allowing the game to now run on your PC in widescreen with modern controller support. And there's an entire fanbase out there that wants to use that to remaster the game, to sand down all the awkward edges it has. And I think there's something wonderful about that. There must be a reason outside of the Super Mario brand and its supposed infamy that has made it something worth celebrating decades later. And I think it's that aspect of curiosity. 2020 has been a reason for all of us to go back and re-examine things important to us. Stuck inside small worlds with our own versatility, we can do a lot more than maybe we could have expected. And it all begins with us asking questions. Where does that painting lead? Can I make that jump? What's around this corner? Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout is a battle royale platforming game. You and dozens of others battle it out across obstacle courses, endurance rounds and team sports with the goal of grabbing the crown in the final round. Very simple. It's a game idea so brilliant I'm shocked it took until now for someone to come up with it. I kinda wish I had come up with it. I'm recommending it because it's very good. It resonates in 2020 because it's a battle royale game. Until the next big thing comes along, I think we'll be seeing a lot more of them in the early part of this decade. So, congratulations to Fall Guys for creating one that doesn't involve me having to shoot someone in the head to win. So for that reason, and making it work so well, it deserves credit. Oh boy. GK, formerly known as Gotham Knights, was two full-length tabletop role-playing campaigns I ran for 3 other people between September 2019 and November 2020. The first was my first time as GM, and the sequel was my second. In between, we ran a small spin-off covering a trial of one of the NPCs that included a 4th player as judge. I also produced a series of audio recordings to go along with GK77. And so much artwork. And an enormous 40-page document with a timeline covering events before, between, and after. If you're wondering, I changed the name because of that new Gotham Knights game, which looks pretty cool. Set in a modified DC universe, the constant setting for both campaigns was Gotham City. Batman was a major part of both campaigns, although he was not the main character. Many of his confidants and Rogues Gallery appeared, either as allies or antagonists for both parties. This isn't to mention numerous celebrity cameos, crossover characters from our previous campaigns, and normal citizens of this world. All of which were performed by me. The first game, Gotham Knights 77, concerned the members of the Gotham Knights Detective Agency, former Police Lieutenant Frank Gibbs, Vietnam veteran Kane Colt, and Theodore Holmes, the supposed descendant of England's greatest detective. After he was killed by Deadshot, Holmes was replaced by Lei Fu, son of the office's landlord, and a reformed criminal looking to do good. The great mystery of GK77 concerned the shooting of mayoral hopeful Bruce Wayne. Batman had abandoned Gotham City 5 years earlier following the death of the Joker, leaving the investigation in the hands of 2 former police officers and a private detective, who were friends of Detective Barbara Gordon. Simply, she wanted this investigation done outside of the GCPD out of fears it had been corrupted by outside influences. Helping them in this adventure was Frank's former partner, Lieutenant Murphy O'Hara, community figure and former Cape Theo Grant, Holmes' university friend and sidekick Barnaby, and eventually Bat fan Lou Jenkins, who would end up a sidekick to Lei. It was discovered the shooting was orchestrated by the Parliament of Owls, a secret cabal of wealthy business owners and people of influence in Gotham City. They wanted Wayne removed for his radical policies, and were happy to burn Gotham City for it. Unfortunately, these events played out in a historical event called the 77 Blackout. Hundreds lost their lives, and millions in damages were wrought. Over the course of this adventure, they discovered Batman's secret identity, and then discovered there was more than one person underneath the cowl. Importantly, they discovered that many of their exploits were being covered up by Murphy, who was attempting to engineer the situation to protect himself and his illegitimate son, Lou. Unfortunately, both had been experimented on by the Parliament of Owls, and had been turned into Batmans. As in, actual Bat people. At the end of this adventure, Frank had lost his leg, but gained a movie deal. Kane Colt was forced underground after killing many of Batman's previous rogues gallery, whilst Lei Fu found himself on the path of vengeance to smoke out Kane as a potential ally for Batman, who had returned in some part. One of the main themes of this campaign was speaking truth to power. Many of the forces they went up against held a lot of influence in Gotham City, and used that power to make lives worse for others. The party's ultimate goal was to bring Wayne's shooter to justice, so that things could ultimately improve. Another big theme, resonant from the source material, was masks. No one was really who they appeared to be, including the player characters. A friendly NPC even turned out to be the main antagonist for the party, although wasn't exactly the main villain of the piece. The lessons learned from Gotham Knights 77 was compiled into a video I made called How to GM. This post-mortem used anecdotes to explain how I had come to some of my findings, things like loosening railroading on players and making more time for what they wanted. The idea of the video was so that the person who watched it could learn from my experience to run a better campaign than I did. 5 months later, I had the opportunity to do so. Though not without a small diversion. In between campaigns, game designer Nevin Holmes ran a one-off game of his Justicast system to simulate a court case set in Gotham City. It concerned Gotham City versus the supposed villain of the last game, Murphy O'Hara, a former police lieutenant, reluctant Parliament of Owls member, supposed terrorist, and, at this point of the story, Man-Bat. The 3 players took on new roles. One played a blind attorney who was sought out by O'Hara. The other 2 were career prosecutors, with one secretly working with the remaining Parliament of Owls. Nevin was the presiding Judge Highwater. I played the stand. The point of the trial was to add some closure to events, but it was also an opportunity to mess with expectations. Nothing in any of these games was quite as it seemed, including the true villain of the piece. Things ended with Murphy somewhat innocent, but serving time. Meanwhile, his son Lou was thrust into the limelight, as his metahuman appearance was caught by journalists and had spread across the country. Frank Gibbs, for his troubles, had lost his movie deal and ended up in jail for chaos caused during the GK77 campaign. There were a few things I knew I wanted to do with the next campaign. The first was to move events up a few years into a better time period. We had picked 1977 for the first game because of the play system we used, Spirit of 77. This I wanted to set in the 80s for a few reasons I wanted to get into later. However, confident with how the first adventure went, another thing I wanted to do was experiment. With presentation, with play, and with the big themes. From the last campaign, I kept the theme of speaking truth to power, as it's the spirit of the playbook and something that in 2020 was very much on my mind. How does Batman work in a world where we can't trust law enforcement to do their job of protecting people? And how should that reflect in the game? Can we show a world where things have improved for the better due to the influence of the previous game? Or must things remain bad because that's realistic and it creates obstacles to overcome? This issue stuck with me for a few weeks, and I'm still not sure if I ever found a satisfying answer for it. But I digress. GK86 picked up almost a decade after the blackout. Bruce Wayne had been mayor for 8 years, and Gotham had seen serious improvements. Free healthcare, free education, decriminalisation of soft drugs, socialised housing, police and prison reform, green policies, legalised marriage for LGBTQs and protection of their rights, and most importantly, tipping was banned in restaurants. Batman had also returned to Gotham City, but this time he wasn't multiple people, but a single metahuman with bat-based abilities. The idea was that Gotham still needed a status symbol, and fitting of the 80s, it'd be someone more marketable. However, Wayne had also installed policies to increase surveillance on metahumans, including this new Batman. There was no real villain in Gotham Knights 77, at least in the traditional sense. But that wasn't the case in GK86. There was a few, actually, but the biggest one of the lot was a bold pick. President Ronald Reagan. In a midst to undermine Wayne, to stop the spread of socialist policy beyond Gotham City, he sent a CIA team to Gotham to raise hell. They funded terrorist organisations and interrupted business and commerce in a midst to cripple the city's infrastructure. They had even staged a mental breakdown of the new Batman. This operation was called Golden Kingdom 1986, or GK86 for short. The story concerned a new party. Ajax Jackson, a former baseball player for the Mets with trauma from the blackout, who in the face of increased crime in the neighbourhood had formed a gang called the Guard to protect it. JJ Johnson, a budding investigative reporter looking to find the truth at all cost. Then there was Emmett Cowan, an ex-Special Forces soldier turned cybernetically enhanced hitman for Lex Luthor. After Emmett had been arrested for shooting a party member's brother, he was replaced by Luis Moreno, a Brazilian capoeira fighter who had fled to Gotham to avoid gangs back home. Compared to last time, it was a far more eclectic bunch, and unlike the detective agency of last time, there was no initial reason for them to work together. But fate has a funny way of changing things. The three had been brought together by a fire at Ajax's apartment block. Emmett had been tasked to shadow Ajax, while JJ was there to document the event. They were then asked by an attorney to find a missing girl linked to the event so he would protect the building. But that had dropped all three of them into a meeting with an underground revolutionary cell, led by Ajax's estranged older brother. The three had been drafted to help them investigate a bigger conspiracy. Operation Golden Kingdom 1986. Not quite as smooth as being given a job by a police detective to investigate a mayoral candidate, but those were the characters I had to work with. Helping them this time was a far more stacked cast. Ajax had his family unit, brother Apollo and sister Athena. Emmett had the people in his apartment block that continued to be part of the adventure even after his arrest. He had a handler at LexCorp, called Taliesin. And while JJ had a best friend called Chip, most often he was in contact with GCPD consultant detective Swift, and his MTV boss Lydia Sprang. Then there was Jim Braggett, a Welsh attorney who was the party's main point of contact. Fulfilling Murphy's role from the last game, he was the shapeshifter, going from a trustworthy character to one that... well... This isn't to mention returning characters from 77 like Frank, Kane and Lay, who had all got small arcs showing what had happened between then and now. And then there were brand new characters, and crossover characters, and new celebrity cameos, including one they didn't realise was a celebrity for a while. All of which, again, performed by me. It'd be easy to say that GK86 was Gotham Knights 77 but more, but they both worked out to exactly the same length. It was Gotham Knights but concentrated. For one thing, there was a big reveal almost every single session. There's far too many to count, so I'll just go with a few of the biggies. Lydia Sprang was married to Detective Swift, and both were using JJ to find out more about the party and what they were investigating. It turned out Detective Swift was actually Lou Jenkins from the last game, who had been given a new identity because he was Batman. By the way, Detective Swift's full name is Detective Taylor Swift, because it was a reference to a character that I had played in a previous role-playing game who was also called Taylor Swift. But that wasn't their real name, because their real name was actually Lou Jenkins. But I digress. Jim Braggett was actually Theodore Holmes, who had lost his memories after being shot. The name Jim Braggett was a reference to another campaign about a character who pretended to be an attorney called Jim Braggett. But I digress. Frank Gibbs had a son, except it wasn't really his son. This son had styled himself after Jonathan Crane, who was dead from what had happened in GK77, but his ghost had remained in Gotham City. Ajax had a member of his gang called Sean Carter, who at the age of 16 had yet to actually become Jay-Z. Sean, at some point in the campaign, had been visited by the ghost of dead R&B singer Jukebox Jones, and for a few sessions had become the costume criminal known as Hi-Fi Jones. Lou's wife Lydia was the daughter of the Riddler. The Riddler was working with Ajax's brother Apollo, until he decided he wasn't. Ronald Reagan was behind Operation GK86, and had also ordered Gotham City be flooded with cocaine from Nicaragua. Emmett Cowan, after shooting Apollo Jackson, had accidentally created a social movement. He was then forced to kidnap Batman's baby. Ajax was visited by real-life baseball player Chuck McGregor. However, I then revealed to that player after the game was finished that Chuck McGregor wasn't actually a real person, and that his face was created using AI and Photoshop. Margaret Thatcher and Gorilla Grodd had planned 9/11. But this wasn't the biggest of the reveals. Oh no. Because you see, the big mystery concerned what Operation Golden Kingdom 1986 was. But in the background, there was a bigger mystery building. One, if you can believe it, was bigger than the government planning to destroy an American city. You see, when it came to inspirations, there were two comic books I read before running GK77. Batman the Long Halloween and Watchmen. From both I mostly took tone, but from the former I took some key characters and story points. Harvey Dent was scarred in both, the Falcones were major players, and Alberto Falcone was a factor in GK77 and 86's story. And this was an influence alongside Neil Adams' run on Batman, a mix of grit and goth, where there were stakes despite the silliness. I also brought over characters introduced in this run, like Bane and Man-Bat, and made them part of the story. In 1986, however, I looked a little further ahead. The two comic books this time were Crisis on Infinite Earths, and Grant Morrison's run on Animal Man. The first was because I had laid it as an Easter egg in the original game. These aren't two stories that really mingle with one another, but they inspired the big overall mystery here. Because Crisis on Infinite Earths was going to happen in some fashion, but it wouldn't look like it did from Superman's perspective. Instead, how did the end of reality look to a normal person? And if you knew the truth, what would you do to stop it? Crisis on Infinite Earths was DC's opportunity to clear house, and for a long time that's how I felt about this campaign. It was staring into a big black hole with no idea what to occupy it with. At the end of this adventure, perhaps that would have been the end of Gotham Knights completely. But there was a little bit of me who wanted it to continue, despite the fact that in order to do so, I have to put all of these characters through torture for the sake of a role-playing game. And so that little spark, that little voice, became a character. Jim Brackett had made himself the villain of this adventure because it needed one. He set the three characters through numerous perils because that needed to happen. He tied them directly into GK86 because they were player avatars, and so were able to affect the story in a way that none of the NPCs could. And much like Murphy in GK77, he had to appeal to these characters as a friendly NPC for the most part. He even helped them out in a lot of different aspects, with them not realising until right at the end he had been moving the cogs on all of this. And at the end of all of this, when they had fought the system, they had exposed the CIA to the whole of America and what they had done in Gotham, they were able to finally meet the real orchestrator of these events, not Ronald Reagan or Murphy or anything that had happened beforehand. The person who, since GK77, had put all of this in motion. The Game Master. The players had a interesting reaction to some of these events.
What?
What? Jesus
Right.
fucking Christ. God damn it.
What the fuck is going on in some of these?
Oh my god. Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
You know who it is yet?
Huh? Wait a minute, that's...
You didn't peg this one instantly, the Ghost Hunter.
Oh,
And-
no, I just remember that he fucking drew Ryu at some point. What the fuck?
Now, I'm going to say for dramatic purposes, actually, yeah, Frank, if you want to try and shoot him, roll hustle. I'm not going to let you have
What?
this, okay?
What? Oh,
Okay.
No. Oh god, no. That's the worst thing that's ever happened. No.
Wait.
No.
Look. Look, Ben, look.
No.
Oh no.
Oh god.
All you
I was gonna
see.
say, I feel like I'm having a stroke. Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah. Whoa, baby.
Oh, this is so tragic. This... No, that's genuinely. Ah!
Do I need to be on the roll 20, James?
Ah!
Please hop into the road 20.
Oh yeah. Oh god.
God damn it! What the fuck?
Fuck! That's... Oh no!
No.
Don't say that!
No, I like
I'm
it.
actually gobsmacked!
Fuck off.
He's a piece of shit.
Is
Now,
this
you know how Babe Ruth called his shot? Well, imagine that, but just the fartiest, artiest bullshit.
James, this is why nobody reads comic books. Oh fuck, I hate this. I hate this so much.
For whatever I run next, I think it'll have to be a little simpler. But I am very proud of what I managed to achieve in GK86. It was daring, and while some stuff didn't stick the landing, I'm impressed with how much did. And yet, for all that careful planning and big ideas, I didn't railroad the players, and I certainly made more time for the characters they liked. Oh god, I totally forgot about these headlines. Oh right. Running GK77 and GK86 required about 4 hours of our time out of a week. I'd usually spend half an hour on bookends, a recap of the previous session, a prologue to introduce this session, and an epilogue to maybe tease what was coming next. In between, the players would be given this week's mystery to solve. In GK86, I also made a lot of time for them to interact with NPCs they wanted to and just do some nice character development. Most of the time though, we usually just gab. As the GM, your responsibility is to be the player's window to this world, and referee the rules. You describe the situation, voice the characters involved, give the players potential options, and say, what do you do next? It's expected that a GM will do a little prep to begin with, a situation, some characters, and a few potential solutions they may bump into. Unlike most, I did a lot of prep. In GK77, I had planned out almost all the campaign before we ran it. GK86, I planned week by week, with the big mystery always in the background. To run the game, I used Roll20. It's online software that manages tabletop games. It combines a whiteboard, player sheets, and dice rolling into a simple to use package. The only downside is that they keep leaking people's emails and passwords, and their upload limits are very stingy. Compared to GK77, GK86 was a pretty luxurious campaign. I had a full move list on top of the page for reference, unique player character portraits, a whole big map of Gotham City I'd move their heads around to give them an idea of where they were, and this huge mood board of found photos. And there was also this enormous conspiracy court board to map the mystery so far. All this stuff I had created from scratch, using Illustrator, InDesign and Photoshop. This campaign wasn't just a means to improve as a GM, but also work on illustration, which I hadn't done in a while. I loved a lot of these characters and ideas, and so between sessions I draw torso shots of the characters that might turn up in the session. If I didn't, I would definitely draw them after the fact. And these pictures improved a lot from session 1 to 15, as they did from GK77 to GK86. As we went along, I got a lot more sophisticated with this stuff. One session I started with the entire game screen flipped 180 degrees to emulate that someone was hanging upside down. Another we did this interview footage by pushing along a strip with character portraits on it. I even started using a soundboard towards the end to try and emulate a number of clones of the same character, and use in-world sensor noises. I had always wanted to maybe use some kind of like voice manipulation software, but I never quite got to that level. I'm gonna say you shouldn't do any of this stuff the first time you run, but if you have the capability, it is appreciated. Well, this game doesn't really have an A button. Like, it doesn't use the keyboard or controller. Most of the time, I just let the players tell me what they wanted to do as characters, and it happened. Essentially, I was the game engine who would say what happened next. Sometimes, if there was a reason for an NPC not to let that happen, or we needed a challenge, or there was a way the story could go in a new direction, I asked them to roll. Spirits of 77 is a PBTA system, or powered by the apocalypse. Rather than rolling a big 20-sided die like Dungeons & Dragons, they rolled 2 6-sided dice, or 2d6 for short. We would then add modifiers to the final result, such as the character's strength, speed, smart, soul, or smoothness, depending on what made sense. For example, Ajax Jackson was a cool guy who'd use confidence to talk his way out of a jam, so we'd often apply smooth to improve his results. If he was in a fight, we would have to apply might. And then occasionally, when we had to leave things to luck, he would have to apply his soul modifier, which actually made a result worse. Like, let me give you an example of how it works. This won't take long. Grab 2 6-sided dice if you have them, or load up random.org. Here's the situation. You've headed into a bar and sat in a patron's favourite seat. They want to throw down, so now you have to defend yourself. We'll say you have average strength and speed, so no modifiers on this. Roll those dice and let's see what happens next. Ooh, okay. So those at home who rolled anywhere between a 2 and a 6, I'm afraid that is a hard failure. You're punched in the nose and have hit the floor. Blood is spraying and you're seeing stars. But good news to those who rolled between a 10 and a 12. You anticipated that punch easily, either deflecting it out of the way or jiving your head. Now you've opened them up for an attack. But you, the 7 to 9 people, you got a mixed success. This means that you achieved what you wanted, but there's a cost or complication to that. Maybe by deflecting the punch, the patron is about to accidentally hit an old woman who's sitting beside you, or they got their fist caught on your jangling earring and they want to yank it back. In those situations, I'd usually follow up with, what do you want to do next? Though sometimes we never even got to those situations. Maybe you could have even talked your way out of it, or kicked out their leg, any matter of things. If the players came up with a better action than I could, I'd let them have it. And the thing is, those roles that we made and decisions that the players took, that's what led to all those weird revelations and all those interesting story points in both GK77 and GK86, so... This is the cool thing about tabletop role-playing games. Well, the best ones at least. If you can dream it, you can do it. Your player sheet and the moves are guidelines for how you should approach situations. But as long as it's in the realm of possibility, you can say, I would like to do this. As advanced as role-playing video games have gotten, we haven't quite reached the infinite engine of things that are within the realm of possibility. We can make games look realistic, and we can add realism in physics, but we can't quite break down that barrier yet. We can't do anything we want to. And well, that doesn't even touch upon all the kinds of stories that could be told that RPG games don't. But it's likely there is a tabletop game out in the wild that would allow you to play the character in the story you have always wanted. I really like GK77 and GK86 for a few reasons. Like I said, it's 2 campaigns I ran from start to finish off my own back, with 120 plus hours of planning and I'd like to think successful execution. But like I stressed, it was an avenue to build the adventure I always wanted to see. I could have ran a straight fantasy campaign or a science fiction one or a Call of Cthulhu one, but instead I ran this mystery epic set in Gotham City. One that was about the people who lived there rather than costume criminals a lot of the time. One that could dig into big themes but also be pulpy and weird and funny. Despite the fact that he's a bit fash, I think Batman comics are cool. And I use this as an opportunity to make him not fash, or at least deconstruct some of those elements. I could change all elements of the story to either make it fit better for the player's adventure, or just to see, would it be cool if we tried this? But in the case of GK86, I could use this campaign to celebrate other bits of media, including previous campaigns that we had ran, taking moments and characters we liked and working them into this new world. But importantly, I could change and challenge a lot of this stuff. Because you see, that was why it was set in 1986, because one of GK86's big themes was nostalgia. The 80s is the era of nostalgia. Stranger Things and Cobra Kai and Synthwave and even Cyberpunk are all steeped in the aesthetics of this era. But nostalgia can often blind us to the lessons of history. People often forget that the 80s was the time of AIDS and nuclear annihilation. Ronald Reagan wasn't put in the campaign as a cuddly old Republican many would like us to remember him as is the case in the new Call of Duty game. He was an insane murderer who would have American citizens killed at the altar of neoconservatism. It was the time of Ghostbusters and Transformers and MTV, but it was also the time of the crack epidemic and police brutality. Things that I have a feeling aren't written about in Ready Player One. But like I said, GK86 was also out nostalgia for our previous campaigns, including GK77. I brought back previous player characters, but they had to be changed for this new situation. And the same went for these previous player characters from these different campaigns remade in this universe. I even went to the effort of recreating a previous adventure that had happened through this lens of nostalgia. But I had to challenge that. While I loved these old characters we had, I had to face that putting them into this world was essentially a care home for old ideas, much like how one of the previous player characters, Frank Gibbs, had been locked up in a care home. We liked all these previous ideas because they were new and daring, so they had to become daring again, for better or worse. I annoyed my players a lot with GK86, but considering the story I wanted to tell, I had to. I wouldn't recommend you doing that for your own games, however. Why I recommend it? Simple. There is nothing else like it. Role-playing is awkward and embarrassing. You might have to do a funny voice for it. You might have to get the names of things wrong. You might forget what you're even there for or what you're supposed to be doing. And in some cases, you'll forget what these dice do or what this stat means. But it's absolutely worth it. Just for moments that you'll talk to people about, you'll try and relay all these weird and funny things that happen. I've tried to do this in this video the best of my ability. It's hard to do so without having to also explain what this stuff was, but again, it's like a person that you know or a place that you've been or a thing that you've seen, and you're trying to get that across to somebody because it means something to you and you want it to mean something to them as well. For 4 hours a week, I could forget about lockdown and instead get invested in a fantasy environment that wasn't perfect, but we were working on improving that. I may have got a little too invested in it, even going as far as creating a little avatar of myself to hammer that point into the players. But it allowed me and my friends to blow off steam at the end of the week and, I don't know, do something cool. GK77 wrapped up just before the lockdown went into effect. GK86 was as luxurious and as ambitious as it was because of the lockdown. It was as it was because of the George Floyd protests, the US election, and even the continued conversation around D&D and its representation of race and the need to fight people. It was as it was because I wanted to see old characters I liked in a setting I had grown to really like, and that their stories had finished in these previous campaigns, but I wanted to give them new ones. I wanted to see what was to happen next. While I don't think anything tangible will ever come out of what we put together, at least not without a heavy amount of editing and so many permissions made, I'd like to think that GK77 and GK86 have improved my approach to a lot of things. They made the podcast Quest and Show possible, and plenty of other projects I've worked on this year. And, well, I'm moving on to a new campaign with a new GM, but I'd like to GM again pretty soon, maybe with this party, with a different party or whatever, so I guess for now, they're the best role-playing games that 2020 could have produced, that I was directly involved in, at least. And with that, to those who stuck to the end of the video, I'd like to wish you all a happy holiday and new year, and hope a wonderful 2021 is in store for you. As for me, well, I guess you'll see.